Hi, my name is Erin, and today I'm going to talk about my April reading wrap-up and my top 3 books for the month of April. So first up, I started off strong reading 10 books from the DCI Jack Logan series by J.D. Kirk. The Jack Logan series falls into the typically sad and drunk or cold and drunk map of Europe detectives, so set in Scotland, but Jack Logan is in fact a recovering alcoholic. I really enjoy these books in terms of their adherence to kind of the principles of crime fiction. So they're a bit thrillery, but there's a mystery. The characters are really well developed, and I have a huge affection for detective stories generally, so I enjoy them. They're not all of equal quality, but I do really like them, and they are available on Kindle Unlimited, I think all 21 that are out so far. Then I read Strange Pictures by Uketsu, which was not very good. It's the kind of cleverness that probably appeals more to my children than to me. It's, you know, there's these pictures that emerge, the story's told through 3 different narratives. I didn't find any of them particularly compelling, and I didn't find the twist very twisty in the end. There are 2 or 3 more books in this series, and I will not be reading them. Then I read Love Letters to a Serial Killer, which I thought had a great premise. Someone who's really interested in true crime, loses their job, decides to follow a case. The accused murderer is very handsome, initially starts writing to him to have a go, and then, you know, this relationship gradually builds. Where it failed for me was I felt that it didn't subvert the stereotypes, it lent into them, and that made pretty much everybody really deeply unlikable. So I did not find it super fun to read. Your mileage may vary. After that, I decided to continue along a pretty depressing path and read So Late in the Day by Claire Keegan. I will probably read anything that Claire Keegan writes. I think she is brilliant. I think what she does in her prose with such a minimal amount of text is truly remarkable. So Late in the Day really explores the pervasiveness of everyday misogyny, but from the perspective of a man. It is very harsh in its truths, and ultimately I found it a little bit dispiriting in the sense that a lot of people who who move through the world in that way are not looking to change and are probably not open to that, but it is remarkable as always, the prose. After that, I read a book I got in my BookBox subscription. On Sundays, she picked flowers. This was I really enjoyed this one. It is a queer Southern Gothic horror story. It opens with Judith, who lives with her abusive mother. There's sort of a point of huge violence and climax, and she leaves. And she drives until she sort of can't drive anymore, and she ends up at a house in a forest, and the house has its own spirit and personality. So there are haints in the forest, and she builds her own life in this place, and then one day another woman arrives, and that changes how she exists in the world and how she interacts with the space around her. And I thought it was really compelling. I thought it was a really cleverly done story. The horror is relatively graphic, and so if you have things that you don't like, this would be one to check content warnings. After this, I read The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, which I found to be really excellent. I think the big thing for me was Faulkner's ability to centre the story around a character who never had a narrative voice. So The Sound and the Fury tells the story of the Compson family in the interwar years. They are a declining Southern family, much more impoverished than the generations before them. There are 4 children. There's Benji, who has disability. There's Quentin and Jason, the 2 other sons, and there's Candace, or Caddy, the sister. And at the heart of the story is Caddy. So the first part of the book is from Benji's perspective, a real stream of consciousness and lacking any kind of linear flow. What I appreciate about that, and I've been thinking more about this in other books, is the way that Benji is given a full interior life, even though it is chaotic and at times difficult to follow. Then the next part rewinds 10 years to when Quentin was at college at Harvard. So he is one of the brothers, and it follows his last day before he takes his own life. And Quentin is really grappling with the principles that he was raised with around gentlemanliness and the South, and what is right and what is good, and the life that he finds himself actually leading, and the sacrifices that are being made, and his own level of discomfort with that. And then the next is narrated by Jason, and it takes us to a couple of days following Benji's initial narration. Caddy's daughter is being raised by them in the house. There's a lot of tension between Jason and Caddy, which reflects, I think, his bitterness and jealousy and feelings toward Candace. And it really is, he is really the end of the line for the Compsons in terms of who they were. He is unhappy, he is bitter, he's always looking for opportunities to take advantage, and they never really quite pay off. And then the final part is narrated by a third person narrator, so not a point of view narrator, and it sort of brings it all to a conclusion. For all, Faulkner really paints the picture of the decline of the Southern family. I did appreciate the opportunity that breaking out from that presented for characters like Candace and her daughter. So yeah, I thought it was fantastic. I think it's a really strong example of modernist literature. After The Sound and the Fury, I wanted to read something that I knew I would just enjoy. So I read the Carnival Murders by Irina Shapiro, which is, I think, book number 7 in the Tate and Bell mysteries. Another Kindle Unlimited series. Last year, I discovered Tate and Bell at a time where I really needed some comfort, and they certainly gave that in droves. The premise of the series initially is that we have Sebastian Bell, who is a detective with Scotland Yard in the Victorian era, and he was a real star of a detective, and then his wife and unborn child are murdered, and so instead he becomes an opium-addicted detective. And then we have Gemma Tate. So Gemma's twin brother went to visit the cemetery, and when he was there, he discovered a dead body. And then as he was running to report the body that he'd found, he was hit by a bus and he died. Gemma has returned from being a nurse under Florence Nightingale in Crimea. So we have these two characters with quite a lot of backstory built into that shorthand, which is something I appreciate. I think that in detective stories, character really is everything, because there's only so many different plot points you can have. So I have a very strong affection for these two characters, and over the course of the series, they continue to work together to solve mysteries, and I just really enjoyed this, and it was a lovely book to break up the month. After the Carnival Murders, I read Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaghy, which was one of my book club's picks for April, and I thought this was a pretty good book. I think that it couldn't decide whether it was going to be genre fiction or literary fiction, and that was its weakness. So it had a lot of the pacing and the character shorthand that you get in a thriller, but it took sort of the literary fiction option of killing a lot of people for emotional impact, which I think weakened it a bit. I am really enjoying reading books at the moment that grapple with issues of climate. So Wild Dark Shore is set on a fictional version of Macquarie Island, which is a sub-Antarctic island where there is a seed bank, and because of climate change, the island is being eroded into the sea. So we have Dominic and his 3 children. He is the steward of the island, And one day a woman, Rowan, washes up on the shore, and this is what happens after that. And so there's themes around what do we save? Are we allowed to be non-utilitarian? There's lots of themes around grief. And I think there's a really nice exploration around family and motherhood and love. It wasn't entirely successful for me. I followed up Wild Dark Shore with The Red Winter by Cameron Sullivan, which is a relatively new release fantasy novel, and Cameron Sullivan is Australian. And The Red Winter is the story of a werewolf type creature in France. It's told in 3 timelines. So the main timeline, our narrator is Professor Sebastian Graves, who is immortal in some ways and shares his body with a demon, a spirit, something called Sarmadel, and they have been entwined for as long as he can remember. And he's returning to a part of France where 20 years before he had helped them break free of a werewolf. So the son of his friend and former lover comes to ask his help. So the two main timelines we get are the current timeline with the beast, and then him reminiscing about the timeline with his lover. So there is a really nice queer love story there. And then the 3rd timeline takes us back to Joan of Arc and Sebastian's enslaved succubus, who is just divine. Her name is Livia. She is amazing and hilarious. I love her. This book takes elements of Pratchett, the humour, the footnotes, but also all of the most beautiful things about fantasy in prose. It's really well done and interwoven with a lot of different mythologies from different parts of the world. And there are plans for a sequel, which is excellent news. Following up from the icky gooey werewolves, I read a sexy werewolf book, Mate by Ali Hazelwood. So in Mate we have Serena, who is a rare human and werewolf hybrid, and we have Cohen, who is an alpha werewolf. And Cohen realizes very quickly that Serena is his mate, but they think that maybe Serena can't have a mate because she's a hybrid, and they don't really know much about hybrids. So this is a pretty classic paranormal light Omegaverse novel, and a sort of classic Ali Hazelwood with lots of yearning and pining. But I appreciated the humour. There's a lot of found family here. This is the follow-up to Bride, which involves Serena's best friend Misery, who is a vampire forced to marry a different werewolf alpha. Mate is romance, so it ends how you expect it to. After Mate, I read Bog Queen by Anna North, and I was once again disappointed. The cover is so pretty. I really thought that this would be something that I would enjoy, and I thought, yes, a bog body, a dual timeline history. We have the story of Agnes, who is a pathologist working on the body of a young woman found in the bog. And then we have our young druid woman is our other storyline. And ultimately the whole thing left me feeling really cold. The characters weren't really developed. I was just told a lot. There was a lot of telling and very little showing. So lots of description, but it all just felt quite superficial. So I think the bones of a good story were there, but the delivery didn't work for me. Then I read The Night of Baba Yaga by Akira Otani, translated by Sam Bett. And once again, I was disappointed. I expected some kind of queer samurai amazingness, and there was lots of fighting and there was some subtle queerness, like it's there, but it's done in such a way that you could erase it if you wanted to, which I found quite disappointing. The twist wasn't very twisty, and I was left feeling a bit why. And so, so that one was quite disappointing. I did not find the thrills to be very thrilling. It was just kind of violent all the time. Had another fail after that. It's called Love Me to Death. It was a thriller, an FBI one, and it's one of those ones where everyone in their family is brilliant. And I assume at this point a billionaire, and there's very clever bad guys, and there's a romance subplot. But the whole thing just left me kind of meh, like it felt like reading a Reader's Digest condensed novel. After those three, I was feeling a bit worried that I was going to finish the month off on a real low. So I decided to treat myself and read Cleat Cute, which I bought a few months ago at a local to me independent bookshop called Astoria. Astoria specialise in fantasy and romance, and Cleat Cute is a really lovely sapphic sports romance where we have two women hoping to be on the US women's football team and playing on the same professional team. There's a very strong attraction and lots of tension between them, but also a really lovely focus on building friendship as well. Really good efforts at communication and giving care to each other, even if that's done imperfectly, and demonstrations of good effort on communication, and the idea that that's always a work in progress because we can't control how other people hear what we're saying. Great neurodivergent rep, and just a really, really lovely sports romance. My top three for April were The Red Winter. I loved this book. I think this could end up being one of my favourite books of the year. The Sound and the Fury. I haven't read Faulkner before, and I would read more, although ideally with a less ugly cover. For number three, Wild Duck Shore. Bits that were good were really, really good. I hope you had a lovely April. I'd be keen to know, have you read any of these books? What did you think? Do you like moody detectives who shut off their feelings? Do you read varied genres, or do you prefer to stick to one? Love to hear what you're reading. And don't think about it too much. Take care and see you next time.